Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here and to see many old friends and colleagues from a variety of different places. This is a program that's clearly attracted a broad audience, a lot of interest, and with good reason, because this is, as is always being said, the existential issue of our time, even if we don't necessarily know what to say about it. A famous economist once said, if something can't go on this way, it won't. And we may be on the brink of proving him wrong, actually, with respect to climate change, because, in fact, we are losing the battle, and we know that, despite all the progress that we have made. And I do want to present progress, because I think I have some stories to tell, some examples to give that are worth spreading to other places and taking heart in. At the same time, we know that we have a lot more to do. California is at the head of the line of jurisdictions that put up their hand and said, we're going to do something. We were first state in the country to have a comprehensive climate program, and it's a position that we're very proud of and which we carry with us when we go other places and frequently are asked to speak essentially on behalf of the United States. So we've been working on global climate change for well over a decade now, under 3 governors, and a legislature that has consistently supported and pushed for more work in this area. And I think we have some important lessons to share. We met our original 2020 target, which was the target of the Kyoto Treaty, 4 years ahead of schedule. And we find ourselves every year making progress and making investments, both public and private, in low-carbon, clean energy programs. But at the same time, we are also watching the growing impacts of climate change as they become more apparent and more ferocious. And we know that we have to speed up the transition now, not just to cuts, but to a carbon-free economy, and that we're looking at ways not only to cut emissions, but to absorb more carbon and literally to find ways to take carbon out of the air and put it to work. So this is well beyond what we're currently doing at the moment. What we are doing is guiding an effort to cut greenhouse gases emissions through something called a scoping plan. The legislature assigned this task to the Air Resources Board, which is the agency that I've been in charge of since 2007. And I think they did it for a reason, which is that they wanted to give this to an agency that had a history of developing broad-based programs and plans relying on engineering and science and doing it in a way that not only didn't destroy the economy of California, despite frequent predictions that it would do that, but that could actually enhance and support economic growth. So the scoping plan that the Air Resources Board developed lays out a comprehensive set of policies and programs and investments that cut across most, essentially all sectors of our economy. The scoping plan that was originally developed more than a decade ago has been updated twice, and we're about to begin another effort that will support the effort to reach carbon neutrality by 2045. We called the first scoping plan a framework for change. And over the past decade, we've built a policy framework that stands as a foundation for continued actions to keep driving down emissions. So we found that we needed to make a shift away from carbon that would attract or involve many entities that either didn't care about or didn't particularly want to know about their role in global warming. And it meant that we would have to find ways to convince people that there was a long-term value in carbon-free alternatives. I think what we have is a pretty durable set of policies that provide the kind of long-term economic signals that we were told we needed to send, that there was going to be a market for increasingly cleaner, lower carbon technologies. Laws like, for those who follow California bill numbers, AB 32, SB 32, and our renewable energy mandates have certainly created some very high-level targets that show the reason why we would make continued greenhouse gas reductions. And our regulatory programs work towards moving us in that direction. So we have a set of interlocking programs that are designed to push the economy in the low-carbon direction. We've built many of them to be adaptable and flexible based on our experience with the clean air regulations. We know that success over the long term means that you have to enlist the private sector's ingenuity and its commitment to innovate, and that it in turn brings to the table ideas and technologies that we would not be capable of imagining, much less implementing ourselves. But for all of us, the economy-wide cap and trade program, which sets a price for carbon or creates a price for carbon, is clearly an essential element of this arrangement. And it goes back in its concept and very original design to the work of many of our colleagues in the academic community, including some here at Stanford. I was very pleased to see Larry Goulder earlier and to know that, you know, you can survive having been on these advisory committees. And he, and he actually told me that he had been surprised, but pleasantly, I think, to see that most of what the committee recommended indeed had come to pass. So this is one of those great situations where good ideas actually made their way into government policy. This program, as I think most everybody knows, but just to restate it very simply, it sets a cap of allowable emissions based on what we believe is necessary to meet the goals that were in place when we first started back in well, really 2008 when we started to design the program. The cap continues to ratchet down over time. The companies that are under this, the entities, mostly businesses that are under the cap, are required to have allowances. The state issues the allowances. They can trade them or buy new ones. If they have more than they need, they can give back. We had a complicated starting position in terms of how we allocated those allowances, which included a small set-aside of allowances that the state kept control over and which we auction ourselves and where the revenue comes back to the state. So 10% roughly of the value of all these allowances comes to the state. The rest went to the entities that were subject to the program and has been dealt with in various ways, but that 10% alone has generated more than $7 billion for the state of California's Treasury, part of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And from having been seen as a problem when we first started to design the program, because there was a fear of how the state could possibly cope with these additional revenues, it of course has turned out to be a tremendous asset as far as not only convincing legislators who otherwise would not have had any particular interest in global warming as an issue for their communities, but of actually building support in communities around the state, as over 50% of the value of those allowances has been directed to the most impacted communities in our state for projects that have a direct benefit in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions over the long term, and also have other community benefits as well. So this has turned out to be a real virtue of the program, although it wasn't necessarily the thing that we were most interested in at the time. We also have anecdotal evidence, but not, I think, probably as much as we should, of changes that companies have made in their operations in anticipation of the cap and of the lowering of the cap, that people have actually chosen to make changes in their operations and to invest in technologies that they would not have done otherwise in order to stay underneath their cap. And as a regulator, as a government person, I think one of the things that I'm probably the proudest of is the fact that we've had true-ups every 3 years on a rolling basis companies have to demonstrate that they actually have enough allowances on their books to cover their emissions of greenhouse gases, and we have had 100% compliance with this regulation. And we have very, very good verified data to show that that's what's going on. So there are critiques of the program. It clearly, in and of itself, is not ambitious enough to drive to the level that we know we need to get to by itself, or even in conjunction with other measures that we're going to have to look at. But I think we can say honestly that it has been a success. But it is not alone, and in and of itself, it was never intended to be responsible for most of the emissions reductions that we were seeking. Other programs that were sector-based regulatory programs, like our advanced clean cars requirements, the low carbon fuel standard, and energy efficiency standards, establish other kinds of long-term and clear requirements that also give companies flexibility to innovate and to find cost-effective solutions. As new technologies emerge and as they scale up, we increase our ambition, and we're able also to look at more stringent programs. So we can say, I think, without really any hesitation, that the program is delivering benefits. Emissions are down everywhere except from the transportation sector as a whole, where we continue to see increases in driving, which we do not have control over as of this point. And we see that the economy is growing. So that's a good thing. And at least with respect to the electricity sector, we've broken the link between growth and energy use and emissions of greenhouse gases, which is really a wonderful thing. We are also the second largest zero-emission vehicle market in the entire world after China. So only China, the nation as a whole, has more electric vehicles than we do in California. Still not enough. We need way more, but we do have them, and we're seeing a very nice upward trajectory with more models being introduced every year and more consumer awareness, and the prices coming down to close to parity between electric vehicles and gasoline vehicles. We also have 40% of the clean fuel investments in the entire country, and more than 5 times the number of clean tech patents of any other state. These are good bragging points with other states. They also help to lure other states into joining us in this effort. We're investing billions of dollars, as I said, from the cap and trade program, but others as well, in a variety of different kinds of low-carbon projects every year. And clean energy companies come to California because they know we have this framework and commitment, and that it's been there and shows every sign of not wavering. I think we can show that cutting carbon is consistent, therefore, with our growth overall, but we need partners. We can't do this all by ourselves. I mean, we certainly can't cure or stop the march towards an uninhabitable planet with the 1% of emissions that California is directly responsible for. And we really need leadership at the federal level to grapple with sources that are essentially federal, including aviation, transportation, other transportation policies, and trade policies as well. When we set out on the development of our scoping plan back in 2007, we were quite optimistic at that point that there was going to be a federal climate framework that we would be part of. And we were worrying about, how we would get our cap and trade program to come in under a federal program, what we would do if there was a carbon tax that overlaid the cap and trade program. And we had, we thought about these issues, and we had some answers to some of these things. As it turned out, we never had an opportunity to test any of those ideas because, as everybody knows by now, the Trump administration decided simply to leave the field and to deny that there was an issue at all. But that doesn't mean that we can't continue working with others to steer the programs, our programs and others, away from carbon, because we have to do that. So one of the things that I've been the most encouraged to see in the last couple of years there's been the rise of something called the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is a bipartisan group of 25 states that have come together after the president announced that the U.S. was withdrawing from the Paris Accord, which, of course, technically we haven't done, but nevertheless, he's done it. And we have 13 states that are part of the coalition that actually follow California's vehicle standards. A number of states in the Middle West are developing programs that are modeled on our low-carbon fuel standard, as they increasingly understand that this is a way that agriculture can engage in development of advanced biofuels and make money by doing it. We're working with a number of countries around the planet, actually on every continent, except Antarctica, to collaborate on a bunch of different programs. Canada has recently announced their plans to pursue California's advanced vehicles and to break with the Trump rollback on emission standards. And it looks like they're going to have a chance to continue to pursue that policy at the national level. We also have a newly approved tropical forestry standard that's designed to be a template for how investments in tropical forests could be measured and monetized, and we can play a role as a state in helping to keep those essential resources from being destroyed. So as we look forward, we think that we are on a path which we can continue on and should. I'm sure everybody knows about the challenges that we faced. We have had several different types of attacks coming at us from the Trump administration, and just today we got a new one, which is claiming that our memorandum of understanding that we have with Quebec that allows us to implement a joint auction of allowances and to acknowledge allowances issued in our two different jurisdictions is unconstitutional. Timing of this is a little peculiar, but they filed it in the Eastern District of California, which is in Fresno, which I think they probably think is a friendly jurisdiction. And so far as we can tell, there is absolutely no legal basis for this whatsoever. I mean, we've been through these arguments many times before. It is not a treaty. Many states have arrangements with other states in other countries on a whole variety of different topics that we work on together. So, we're not worried, but it's one more thing and one more set of issues. And we'll keep working to develop standards to further drive technology and protect health and climate change all at the same time, and to support continued economic growth. But as I said at the outset, we need to go from where we are today to a whole new level in terms of integrated effort. So the bits of programs that we have right now, ambitious as they are and hard as they have been in many cases to achieve, are just a starting point for what we need to do. And that is one of the many reasons why I'm hoping for great things from this group and from this conference, and look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you. What new actions can the California Legislature take to have a large impact on climate? Perhaps to encourage innovation in industry, thank you, or aviation. Aviation, yes. I think there's a lot of people asking that question right now and wondering what the answer to it is. I feel like some of the innovations that we need to look at go well beyond the sources that we have currently been looking at. I mean, there's one viewpoint that says that since I've seen the number 700 or let's say 1,000 even industries around the world are actually responsible for something like 75% of all global emission, directly or indirectly. We could just focus on them and forget about all this other stuff. But this is not the way that we tend to look at this issue. We tend to think that since the ingredients for climate change are so embedded in so many different parts of our economy, and the impacts are so widely felt around, the need for adaptation or resilience, as we call it, is so great that we need to invest in a lot of different ideas to see which of them are going to work. But for this moment, I would say that on the technology side, it's probably the capture and reuse of carbon. That's the single thing that I'd like to see us focusing on the most, where I think the most innovation is called for. In the areas of natural resources and land management, we see a need for a lot more effort and attention being paid to how our soils can accommodate more carbon-friendly agriculture, and moving agriculture into the direction of being a part of the solution is not only important for California, for our own economy, but I think it's one of those areas where breakthroughs are going to be really important for the rest of the world. So those are a couple of the big ones that come to mind. Okay, why do we feel we can't control driving? Maybe we thought the same before cap and trade. Today, there's a financial incentive to drive to this meeting in the form of free parking. Might we change driving incentives? Well, we might, but that's probably the thing that the politicians do feel the most worried about. And I think that in order to come up with a set of politically sellable measures in a democratic society, you really have to be able to link the pain with something that people are going to find more attractive, unless you're just going to wait for life to be so miserable that people can't drive because they're, having to stay home and bail out their basements, or, worry about what to do when the lights are out in their homes. This is not a trivial question. I don't mean to trivialize the answer. I think smart, well-meaning people have thought about economic incentive programs a lot, but have been unable to come up with programs that they think are going to be acceptable. I have to say, most universities are sort of an experiment in pricing transportation because they make it so hard for people to drive or park on campus, right? Isn't like the biggest perk you could have as a faculty member is a parking space? So I don't know that any of us are exactly the right model for that, but it is probably the best illustration about how economics and politics don't always come together very, very happily. I feel like, as a resident of Los Angeles, which is probably, at least in its early stages, one of the most unsustainable places on the planet, and yet is an economically powerful engine in California, reliant, among other things, on a port and an airport that are the transmittal points for goods from around the world to other parts of the United States, as well as within our own state. We have an opportunity to model some changes, and it's not just about passenger cars, but about the way we move stuff around as well, to find some more zero-emission type approaches. So I think that this is an area that's ripe for reform and for new ideas, and that we need to try some stuff in different places. And I think that's where the governor is on this at this point as well. Okay, so if most people haven't yet internalized the existential threat of climate change, what will it take for us to do so? And I think I'm going to merge this with the next question, which is, would it be impactful for California, as the 5th largest economy in the world, to declare a climate emergency? The supervisors in Imperial County just declared an emergency at the Salton Sea, because they want to free up money that was designated, has been planned for many years to be spent to help to stabilize the shore, the edge of this lake, which is shrinking as the amount of agricultural runoff that was once keeping it alive is shrinking. And they thought if they declared a state of emergency, that would immediately free up funds to come and fix some things that they would like to see us fix. I don't think the state of emergency in and of itself is going to solve the problem. And I don't think the fact that it's not at the top of everybody's agenda is necessarily a sign of failure in and of itself. Of course, I was heartened by the marches in many cities around the world and the activism of young people demanding action on these issues. I think there's a lot of things we can do that have other benefits besides climate change, even if they're part of our effort to reach our climate goals. And so I'm just not as worried as some people might be about whether we think it's as being talked about enough. But somebody asked why the politics around climate change are more constructive in California than elsewhere in the country. Well, of course, we are blessed with a lot of renewable energy resources of our own, which is a good place to start. We do have sun and wind and geothermal resources available to us, which have made it easier. We have the history of having dealt with air pollution that gives us some confidence that we can take on a very large atmospheric problem. But I think also the difference really is that this is a place where people come because of the climate, even though the word climate might have a different meaning there. But the fact is that it is our climate that is probably the overriding thing that people actually love about California. They want to come here to see it or to live in it. And if we screw it up, everybody knows, I think, internally that this is going to lose the state that we have. And so people are not willing to do that. The other thing I would say is, just based on all the political polling that I've seen over the years, the biggest supporters of some of the toughest programs that we have are not our wealthiest people. They're not the ones who could most pay. They tend to be people who believe that cleaner energy, cleaner vehicles are going to benefit them or their children in the future because they're concerned about their public health, they're concerned about their family's health, and they tie these things together, which is not wrong. It's not wrong to say, more pollution coming out of the cars, more gasoline being burned by our vehicles, more people driving in congestion and, continuing to burn gasoline is also bad for people's health. And there is that whole other side of this equation, which we absolutely should not lose track of. Let's see, mentioned trade. How about interstate or international trade interacting with California's climate change policies? Well, we, of course, think that we can operate a cap-and-trade program without having to directly link with every other country in the world, but that there are ways that we can link some of our policies together to make sure that California isn't at a disadvantage. And we are part of a group that's been working on this. So I think maybe I have time for just, no more questions. Time is up. All right, well, okay then. Thank you very much.